climb high and do a PhD and work hard and do some research and become a lecturer 2, a lecturer 1, a reader, an associate prof, and become a prof, and maybe an emeritus. So everybody wants to climb. You start maybe as a legal assistant, and somewhere along the line a draftsman, you become a lawyer, and after some time you go to the bar, and maybe you are called to the bench, and so you climb. So we all desire to climb. Now, in between two levels, there's always a threshold, and most thresholds are at the point of doorways or gateways. And so there are threshold obligations, there are threshold requirements, there are threshold demands, and there are threshold mindsets, and for lack of a better word, there are also threshold intelligence. Because when you get there, certain things must kick into play that would help you cross over that threshold to the next level. Obviously, a lot of things are assumed before you get there. But I think one of the first things we want to do is to start by doing justice to what is a threshold. Last week I said a threshold is always a point of beginning or a point of entry. It's the verge. It's also that point where sufficient stimuli, pressure, tension, temperature can be put on board until you get a reaction. And I gave the example last week that if you are pricking somebody, your friend, or you are pinching your friend, or your wife is pinching you and playing with you, that gets to a point when you shout. And if it's a very serious pinch, sometimes your eyes get watery because it's like a reaction has emanated from that stimulus, which has touched nerves and many things around you. And that point where you react is the threshold. So, threshold of pain, threshold of a new move, threshold of a next level. So it's just that point of entry or entrance, or the point of beginning, the point of a break or a breakthrough, a point where there is sufficient enough intensity to produce an effect. And I am thinking this evening that if that is true, then it means that what brought you and what brought me to the threshold is a lot of energy, is a lot of work, is a lot of force. It's not just a laissez-faire attitude that, for you to get to a threshold, you exerted energy, you exerted force. There was some deliberacy and intentionality in what you are doing until you get there. Now, in my work, and I'm sure in a lot of endeavors and fields of life and vocations, it's interesting to know that sometimes people can have enough energy to push to the threshold, and somehow they just relax. It is amazing how many world records have not been broken, how many Commonwealth records, how many World Games records have not been broken because people were at the threshold, but maybe they glanced at the clock, they glanced at the next person behind them, and the crowds were waving, and they knew that, look, they've won. After all, I have won. Anyway, it doesn't matter, I am tired. But with just that little push, 1/100th of a second, a millisecond, could make the difference for sometimes the next 4 years until the next games are held. And so threshold dynamics are something we should be aware of. Threshold obligations, threshold demands, and as I said, threshold intelligence. Because I am at that verge where something must happen. Again, a lot of people, sadly and sad to say, have gotten to that verge, to that threshold, and just quit. Now, there are thoughts and understandings and theories that can surround that, because we all know that our lives are not just what we see, what we hear, what we taste, what we touch, and what we smell. There is a non-physical world. And if there is a non-physical world, then there are non-physical things and beings and entities which have a direct play on the operations of the physical. There are things we don't see, but we know they work. I can't see breeze, I can't see air, but I can see its effect. With the ordinary eye, I can't see a virus, but when it strikes, the whole world knows its effect, and we can see sometimes the collateral damage of a viral infection, especially if it becomes epidemic, it goes viral. And so there is a non-physical part, which is a reality. And so sometimes, especially when there's a recurrence and a repetition, my uncle tried that, he got very close to the verge and it didn't work. My auntie did this and she did so well, she got to the verge and she failed. And my father came and my mother came and me came. After some time, you see the trend, you see the pattern, and you get to understand that there's something wrong. It's not just that somebody is lazy necessarily. It's not that somebody is lacking in a sense of commitment and passion to push over to the next level. It's not that somebody has lost ambition. Sometimes in various levels, there are opposing forces, opposing entities. There are horns. Sometimes there are cultural horns. There are mindsets. In my work and beyond my work, I'll use the word covenant. There are deals and agreements that people made and basically signed. It's almost, let's take nations and the greater bulk of nations that operate in democracy, and they give leaders 2 terms. So maybe I go to the polls and I win, and I know that I am mandated for a term of 5 years, 6 years, 4 years, 7 years. So however, whatever happens, I am sworn in properly and I have 4 years, except I misbehave or something happens and I'm impeached, or I die, or I become incapacitated in one shape, form or the other, or I am found culpable, rightly so, I have my term. And then maybe I run again after my term. And based on my performance, all things being equal, no corruption, nothing evil, let's say I win again. I understand that by virtue of what has been written, agreed upon, and signed, what is consensus orthodoxy, after that next term, 4 years, 5 years, 7 years, I'm going. So it's like my performance, my continuity is predicated upon what has been agreed. Now, this is for good, obviously, because in my mind, I am sure that I am not the only one that is so good that I must outlive my usefulness wherever I am. And so you discover that because there is that bracket in your contract, in your tenure, after that you start making plans, because no matter what you do, the real proper thing based on agreed precedents and is that you move. And so it is. So somebody wonders, why is this person getting ready to move? Why is this person selling their car? Why is there so many for sale signs? Why are they asking for transcripts for their children? It's because it's time to move. Now, in themselves, they may necessarily think that they can contribute more, but according to the prescribed agreement. Now, this is for good. Also, it is the same thing for evil. Somebody wants to do something, but some agreements were made prior to them, either prior to their birth or for the reason why they were born, and that's it. So they can't get outside of that bind because it's the bind that produced them. And so when you find repetitive, recurring, embarrassing situations and difficult situations, sometimes in families, and you just see the repetition, it's like deja vu. Everybody at 49 in that family goes through a tragedy. Everybody that has this, it's like they get very close to being MD and something happens. The brother became MD, 1 week he died. The cousin became MD in another country, 1 week he died. The person became MD in a place where you thought that, okay, nobody here knows him, 1 week he passed away. When you start seeing these patterns and these recurrent and repetitive things, you can't just say this is fate. And like we popularly like to say in this part of the world, so erroneously, And I repeat, so erroneously, Liya alabinda. Yalabinda nako. Now waiting God don't mark. It's interesting for God to leave me to become an MD and then kill me 1 week after. Of what benefit? But when you start looking, sometimes you start seeing that there are deals and covenants. Somebody said, I want this. And the deal was that if I give you this, you have to give me that. You have to give me the life of your daughter. You have to give me the life of your son. You have to give me the intelligence of this. You have to give me that. And sometimes because we are so inordinate and selfish in what we want, we think that it doesn't matter. There is a story in the Bible so true of brothers, twin brothers. One was called Esau, he was the older one, and the other one was called Jacob, he was the younger one. Esau was a hunter. Jacob was a farmer. So Esau had skill with catching animals and cooking them. Jacob had skill with agricultural produce and plants and crops. But for some reason, one day Esau, in the beginning of the Bible's recording in the book of Genesis, Esau came home one day and he was hungry. And I don't understand what kind of a hunger was so much upon him that he couldn't cook. What kind of a hunger was it that he hadn't stored food? So he came to his brother, who was a farmer, and told his brother to give him food. The hunter asking the farmer for food. And so the brother said, I will only give you food if you sell me your birthright. Now, in their custom, the birthright means when the father died, because he was the first child, he inherits the father in everything. He has twofold of the father's blessing. He has everything, and the other children probably just have gifts. So the younger brother asking that older brother that you are hungry, you say you are hungry, I will give you food, but I will give you food on the condition that something is being struck as a deal. Whether Esau was aware of its consequences or its implication or its cataclysmic long-term effect or not, it was going to happen. Because when you strike a covenant, there is a covenant. You are bound to it in its warranty, in its user clause. That's it. And so Esau was reported to have said in the Bible that I am hungry and you say my birthright. Of what use is my birthright to me when I am hungry? I need food. And the brother said, right, I have the pot of soup. I can give it to you, but you got to sign your birthright over to me. And he did. And if you are aware with his story, he lost everything. When the father was about to die, the father was going to bless Esau, but the father ended up blessing Jacob. And people go around saying, well, Jacob tricked his father. Yes, in some ways, but if you go deeper in thinking and spiritual understanding, you will know that Esau had set in motion his own destruction by disregarding what was precious to him. So you wonder, how come Esau is the firstborn? He's been to all the universities. He's so intelligent. Life has smiled at him. All the forces of nature have conspired to him. The economy is so good. The times are so good. Why is Esau not prospering? Because of a deal, an agreement, a covenant he unguardedly, ambitiously, excuse my language, foolishly did and forgot about the consequences. Because, ladies and gentlemen, consequences do not always come immediately. No woman on the earth can tell you that after a sexual activity, they got pregnant that day. No, they can tell you after. Possibly by an HCG test, or they go to the doctors and maybe 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks after their LMP. So consequences take time. So when you get to the threshold, when I get to the threshold, there are certain things that I must be aware of. And ladies and gentlemen, one of them is the understanding that I must not take across the threshold things attitudes, associations that are unnecessary. A threshold is a point of a game change. And it will be sad for me to cross a threshold and know that I have physically crossed a threshold, but everything in my life is the same. Why? Because everything I brought into the threshold, I carried with. People, friends, associations, behaviors, attitudes, habits, passions, appetites, desires. Then the threshold did me no good, because the threshold was a point where I said, you have reached here by the goodness of God, by the mercy of God, by the grace of everybody around you, by the well wishes and the good wishes of the people. There is an opportunity for you to cross over and start something new, better. It's what we wake up to on the day of our birthday. You are now 21. You are now 18. You are now 40. You are now 50. So threshold has its requirements. And because we are all different, the assignment this evening would be, you need to know what are the demands of the threshold you have found yourself in. What are the expectations? What is the intelligence? You know, sometimes I remember 3 years ago, I was opportune to preach in one of the Southwest African countries, a tiny country, wealthy, small country just like ours. And in some ways, I could have easily been at home. The way they operate there, how slow they are, how I was like, wow, this is my country in the southern hemisphere of the continent. Everything I saw was typically how we would do it here. And at a point in time, I told them, you know, you remind me of where I come from. But, you know, there was things that I saw that told me, wow, if they continue like that, if we also continue like that, life would leave us behind. Because there are mindsets that must be put away in a threshold demand and obligation. Part of it is this small friendship. Everybody knows everybody. Nobody likes to hurt everybody. This one and this one in fumble. So nobody is able to stand for principle, because we are all doing group dynamics, even if it is wrong. When we come to a threshold, maybe 31st December threshold, maybe 30th November threshold. For us in Abiding Word Ministries, when we start our conference, our 29th year in just 38 days, on the 2nd of November, it's crossing a threshold. We must be able to glance back and say, wow, we crossed that river. We are a lot better. Let that be the assignment. I'm sure you are at a threshold. I am at a threshold. We are always at different points. How did you get here is good, but it's probably not as important as the fact that you are here now. The threshold point. It's time to cross over. In crossing over, please do not make that mistake of taking along with you things, attitudes, desires, habits, ideologies, decrepit, bad things, and sometimes people that will just make you mark the crossing of a threshold, but nothing has changed in my life, your life, and of course in our national life, especially our national life. Let me stop here because my time is almost up. I want to continue by the grace of God to a third level concerning ship movement. You know, this great ship that can take 4,000, 20,000 containers when it's in the ocean. One great mistake the captain or the pilot can make is just spin it around because he feels it must be spun around, because all kinds of things happen. What he needs to do is to take it gently, 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 because beyond his desires, there are many, many things linked to that his desire to just change midstream. We will look at that because that will speak to me as a father, as a husband, speak to you as an MD, speak to us all, speak to our leadership, speak to everybody. Until I come your way next week, by the grace of God, this is Pastor Forbes saying, have a good evening. May God bless us all. And I hope that when we all cross our threshold, we'll see each other on the other side, looking better, looking different, and happier, and obviously in a more godly way. God bless us all. Good night.